So,
Amazing.
just want to give like a quick introduction to like who we are and everything, and then we can dive kind
Yes,
of
please.
deep into you. So like as Mary Elizabeth said, thank you so much for coming in to interview with us. Like genuinely, it is a pleasure.
Sure.
We appreciate it very much. We're already recording the session, so things are good in that sense. I am Sydney. I am one of the co-hosts of the guest show that we have here at The Impact.
Yes.
You're also the music director.
I am also the music director as well.
Let's not just like short it down.
Like give all the
Yes.
things.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, very much that is the title that I do own. But yeah, you can go ahead and give.
Great.
I'm Mary Elizabeth. I'm the digital media director, and then I'm also the co-host of Sound of Color, and then I co-host another show called Torch and Twang, which is just folk, country, and Americana. So I'm
Cool.
really
Nice.
excited to
Great.
connect with you.
Yes, 100%. Okay. Um,
Awesome.
like I said, thank you for coming in. We just have like a few questions for you, nothing too crazy. And it shouldn't take too long, too much time out of your day because I know you're a busy
That's
person.
cool. No, that's
Um,
cool.
so I'll kick us off with the first question. So could you give us a little introduction to who you are, as Femi Temowo, and
Mhm.
just give us just like a little bit of a taste of maybe even one of your favorite projects that you have worked on or that you maybe currently are working on.
Oh, cool. Well, my name is Femi Temowo. I am an artist, composer, and music producer, and I've been doing this now for quite a few number of years. I think I'm in my like, where am I at? Definitely 2 decades.
Okay.
Let's say about 20 years now. Yeah, just roughly about 20 years now, maybe just a bit under that as a professional musician. And yeah, I get to work on like a plethora of different types of projects. Like as an artist, I tour and I write and perform original music. But also as a composer, I write music for a bunch of different things. One of the main ones being like theatre. I write a lot of music for theatre as well. And as a producer, I write and produce music for other artists. So it's a really a mixed bag of things, and it's always difficult to choose what I prefer to do the most. I think for me, as long as I am being afforded the opportunity to present an original voice in all of these different areas, I think for me that's the kind of the most important thing.
Wow.
I feel like I'm not so interested in music projects that don't allow me to at least, at the bare minimum, have a voice. Something
Yeah.
of myself or some original sentiment in there. So yeah, I think that's really the thing. In terms of like stuff I'm excited about working on, I think it's anything. But I've gotten to a point where I find it quite easy to say no to something if I feel like it's not gonna give me that space. So a lot of the times I feel really privileged, partly because I know that I've worked really hard for it, but also I'm at a point where I can be like, actually, no, I don't want to do that because I don't see myself in that.
Yeah.
So I'm quite excited about all the things that I'm currently doing. I've just come from a rehearsal. It's day one of a new play that I'm writing music for
That's
in
exciting.
a city in England called Bristol,
Yeah.
um, which is not. I live in London, but I've obviously travelled to be here, and I'm up here like 3 4 days a week.
Mm.
And it's very exciting because I just get to make original music whilst watching these incredible actors do their thing, and try to underscore the story they're telling. And yesterday I was playing at you guys heard of the movie Sinners? It's the new Michael B. Jordan movie.
Yes. I didn't know that was the name of it. I saw a trailer.
Yeah, it premiered here in the UK yesterday, and I was playing in a band that played at the premiere, because there's a
Awesome.
lot of music in the film, yeah, and I think
Mhm.
the producers wanted the audience at the premiere to get a sense of that live, like and a lot of it is like it's basically about a blues musician. The film is about a blues musician.
Okay, thank
And a lot of the music we were playing was like, yeah, you will love it. You will love it. It's amazing. Like the film is great, but the music is like, wow, it's like
you.
really, really good.
It's always top
Yeah.
tier when there's a good soundtrack to a good movie as
Yeah,
well.
right. Exactly. So, so yesterday I was doing that. So it's kind of like, very different things, but I love them all. So
Yeah.
it's beautiful.
Oh, that's some
Mm.
awesome stuff. Like genuinely, I didn't even know. Did you have a background in theater or like in, things like that?
No, not specifically. No, theater. I got into theater 2019.
Okay.
Just kind of. I mean, at the time, it seemed like random and by accident. But with these things, I think nothing ever really is random or by accident. It's kind of it was what it needed to be, and it's been really good since since 2019. I think I've averaged about 2.5 shows a year, which has
Nice.
been really cool. So
That's awesome.
yeah, it's been really good.
Amazing
Yeah.
stuff. No, that's awesome. I kind of want to go back to what you were talking about in the beginning. You have been doing this for so long. I'm really interested in hearing,
Mm.
because you did start your career so young. How do you feel that you've grown not only as a musician but as an individual throughout this time?
Oh wow, yeah, that's not a regular one. I think it's crazy because when you're a younger musician, um, you tend to think that there is this link between who you are, or who you are as a musician, and how that kind of colors the value of who you are as a human being. And then as you get older, you realize that they aren't the same thing. And it's very dangerous to not be able to untie that knot because like I say to younger musicians that I get to work with now, it's like try not to allow the day you had on the stage to define how you feel about yourself as a human, because they're not the same things. And we tend to do that with anything, don't we, humans? Whether we are musicians or whether we are leaders of countries or whether we are, I don't know, working in a coffee shop, making coffee, we tend to sometimes, well, a lot of the times, have this idea that who we are and the value of who we are as humans is synonymous with our output or our productivity in whatever we've chosen to do. And I think that's the one thing I've really learned and tried to hold on to over the years. It's like who I am as a human and how I grow as a human being doesn't have to be index linked to my output as an artist. And actually COVID played a big part in helping to make the biggest break, in that thinking. But I do think that as an artist, I've grown by embracing the music of my ancestors as being as valuable as music from anywhere else in the world. Um, and because as a young musician, I remember, although I grew up playing Nigerian music, like I was born in Nigeria, and I grew up playing Nigerian music, I didn't see it as being as valuable as, say, I don't know, playing jazz or, I don't know, playing, even like attempting to learn classical music,
Yeah.
But now I realize that actually that was so stupid to think that way, you know. So in that way, I've grown to accept, the music of my ancestors and my people as being as valuable in the same way that the language is as valuable. English is not some superior language to Yoruba, for instance.
Hmm.
And then as a person, but the crazy thing is, as a person, there is definitely an effect of that because you take more pride in who you are as a person and what you've come from and how those things shape your worldview and the way you hold your head up. Um, is kind of linked to that in a way. So maybe there is a tenuous link between what we are, what we do, and who we are, but it's not in the way we think.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that's how I've grown. I think I answered it. I'm not sure.
Well, that was a home run of an answer. Don't even worry about that.
Yes,
That's
yes.
an amazing
Tell me
answer.
if my answers are too long. I tend to babble a bit, but yeah,
Oh, you're
If you
so
knew us
fun.
personally, you would know that this type of conversation is exactly what we've been
This is all right, cool,
looking
awesome.
Exactly.
Awesome.
And just to go off of what you were talking about like there being a connection between like the person and the artist, like I mean you yourself are an artist, so inherently you do have to have some kind of ties within your
Mm,
art, but it like you said, it's imperative or it's an important notion to keep in your head to like
mm,
not make sure that your downsides or that your what are they called? That your slip ups or anything like that have to do with anything
mm.
that who you are as a person, because then it can cause like being down
Absolutely.
on yourself and being down on yourself and everything.
Absolutely.
But
Yeah.
the art itself is kind of it's a reflection, of how you feel
Yes.
and
Yes.
how you take in the world a little bit. So I
Absolutely.
definitely understand where you're coming from for that.
Hmm. Hmm.
So yeah. But moving on to a little bit of kind of your inspiration that you've taken from a few different artists within your time. I know that we've looked through an extensive amount of things on you and researched and everything. And you said that you take a
Cool.
lot of inspiration from artists like Charlie Parker and Wes Montgomery. So could you tell
Mm,
us a little bit how you ended up discovering these artists for yourself and then kind of how you take inspiration from them and like in what way?
yeah. Yeah, good question. Like I said, I grew up when I first started playing guitar, I was playing kind of West African kind of music,
Yeah.
styles of music like high life and soukous, these types of I mean, high life is a kind of originated from Ghana, even though I'm from Nigeria, but
Mm,
we're neighbors, and it kind of spread across to us. And then
yeah.
soukous was like a music from like Congo, from the which is now kind of Democratic Republic of Congo, and their music had a lot of guitar. Yeah, it still does have a lot of guitar in it, and it's spread all over Africa. It's like I remember when I was coming up, it was kind of like it was the in thing, kind of how Afro beats is now,
Yeah.
although Afrobeats has kind of become a lot more global than
Yeah.
soukous was. Soukous was that, but for the continent,
Yeah.
like everybody loved it. It played at all the parties, and as a musician, it was part of what you learned because it was part of the what you the kind of the music of the day, and it was like you needed to know that music if you were going to be a working musician.
Mm,
So I grew up playing that, and then not long after I started playing guitar, um, this dude at the church that I grew up in, he introduced me to Wes Montgomery and jazz. And then I remember there was another guy at my church who took me and my cousin, who's a bass player who lives in New York now. He took us to our first shot, our first gig, and the first live gig I ever went to was we went to see George Benson play at a venue in London called the Royal Festival Hall. Sorry, the Royal Albert Hall. It's like a huge, huge venue. And I
mm,
remember sitting in the audience watching this gig, having no clue what they were really doing. I just knew it sounded and felt amazing.
yes.
And I was like, oh, when we were leaving, I was like, can I buy the program? And we bought a copy of the program. And in the program, there was an interview with George where he spoke about his influences, and he mentioned Charlie Parker. And I was like, well, if he was influenced by Charlie Parker, that's where I want to go. And I remember finding a cassette tape. I'm not that old, but there were still cassette tapes at the time.
Yeah.
I remember finding a cassette tape of Charlie Parker. It was like a kind of a greatest hits kind of collection type thing.
Mm.
And I remember picking it up and taking it home and listening to it and just thinking, I haven't got a clue what they're doing. So my next objective was to try and find someone who could decode it for me, you know.
Mm.
Um, and the guy at my church who had introduced me to Wes Montgomery, he had tried to kind of teach me a bit about what was going on. But then I remember kind of going out and trying to find people, and I met this guitar player called Alan Weeks, who's a British, black British guitar player, who used to run a music workshop on Wednesday nights in London. And I remember going there once. I saw it I saw an advert for it. I remember going there and I heard him playing guitar from the entrance. I heard it and I was like, that sounds like George Benson sounds. So I was like, this guy knows what it is. He can tell me what it is. And I kind of hung on to him for years, and he helped me to find my way through and kind of taught me how to transcribe the music, how to understand it. And I kind of learned from there, you know. And I learned that, yeah, in order to speak any musical language, you needed to like just learn it from people who are masters of it, you know. And it was like trying to find the influence of your influence and of their influence and work your way back, you know. And it was that journey that, you know, kind of got me into that music and realizing the connection also between the music of my ancestors in Africa and, you know, the kind of Black American music, which is jazz and blues, and what the kind of the similarities and the congruence between those things also really helped to feel some sense of ownership, you know, because that's important. I think you need to feel a sense of belonging in the music and find yourself in it, like I was saying earlier, to make it real for you. And that helped a lot, you know.
It's
Not
really
feeling like, oh yeah, I'm a black guy who lives in the UK, I'm from Africa, so I don't have a tie to these other black men who are making music in America. Actually, there was a direct tie, and learning the history of that was very helpful, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think it's really beautiful to hear that. I'm not a musician myself, but I've always admired the artistry and the passion that it takes, and it's really beautiful to hear from a musician that, you kind of pass that down through
Mm,
generations of people you meet and the people that you've mentored and the people that mentor you, and how that kind of shapes
absolutely.
modern sound. It's just really
Yes.
cool to hear a live example of that. Um,
Mm.
to kind of talk about one of your albums specifically, Ori and Meta, we were doing some research. Did I say that right?
Oh, Meta. Yeah, it was cool. It was close. It's good. Yeah.
I'll never hesitate to correct. Was doing some research on your albums and just kind of the history behind everything. And Okran Meta I learned, was a Yoruba colloquialism that means three men and is often used sarcastically and sometimes sincerely as a panergetic to elevate a man's masculinity. And I was just wondering if
Hmm.
the connection between your title and that colloquialism.
Uh-huh. That's so interesting. It's- yeah, like when they would say, it's yeah, Yoruba is such a profound language. It's such a poetic language, you know. And yes, when it'd be like Okunrin Meta, like it's like you're three men in one, you know, like you know, but Orin Meta is not directly related to that same concept, but it was more related to the fact that in Yoruba culture, songs and music played and still play a very pivotal role in day-to-day life. Maybe in kind of modern city life, you might not find it so much now because the world is becoming a more kind of a homogenous global place, and I think people are starting to lose a sense of some of those things that make us culturally um, um, different, if you like. But maybe in more rural places, you might still find that, you know, like people they'll have a song they sing when they wake up in the morning, a song they sing while they cooking food, or, you know, there are songs that you sing when people get married. They're like very, you know, everybody knows what they are, and you know, songs that you sing if you give birth to twins, for instance. You know, there's so many different things, and I think conceptually, I was trying to make an album to celebrate that concept of having a song for things.
Yeah.
And I was working through um, at that time in my life. I think I was working through the notion of life as a three movement thing: birth, life itself, and then death. And what would it be like if you wrote songs for those three things?
Yeah.
And you know, how do different people perceive those parts of the life journey? So Ori Meta was referring to Ori, which means song, and Meta, which means three, is referring to, you know, which to three songs that would, not that I wanted to limit it to three songs. It was more like three movements, like if you had to write three movements of music to try to capture or encapsulate my feelings about those three processes of living, what would they be? What would they feel like? What would they sound like? And that was what the concept was, for that album. Yes, but I running the line between the Okumi Meta kind of youth. It's not euphemism, I guess. It's just a saying. It's really interesting. No one's ever done that, so that's really cool. You know.
Wow. Yeah, no, that was really beautiful to hear you talk about like the different phases of life and how you then, took that and then put that towards different phases of music and things like that. Like it's really beautiful. And
Mm,
I know that you had already previously talked a little bit about your connection between like your connection as a Black man in the UK, but also as a Nigerian-born man, and also the connection between the people who look just like you, in America and everything like that. So
mm,
I was wondering, as somebody who was born in Nigeria but is living in the UK, how would you say your experiences, in these places have differed, or like what the Black experience is to you or has been for you in the UK, not
mm,
only as a Black man but also as a Black musician, and how these kind of
mm,
are differences or how they are similar in some way.
mm. Yeah, I guess thinking about that, the first thing that comes to mind is the fact that as a young boy, I feel like I still remember the day that I became black, as it were,
Yeah.
because growing up in Lagos, I was just a boy.
Yeah.
I wasn't a black boy. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I remember moving to the UK, and it was like suddenly this became apparent somehow.
Mm.
And not only was I a black boy, I was a black African boy, because there were these differences also that were required between being Caribbean,
Mm.
black Caribbean, and being black African or whatever else, And it
Yeah.
was like, whoa, this is wild, like, imagine like you live in your first 10 years of your life and just being like, yeah, I'm just a boy running around with other boys in the street and we play and we do whatever. And then arriving in the UK and you have like uh you have like other white kids saying to you, oh, my dad says you lot have tails. Where's your tail? Like, like, yeah, like wild stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, like wild things.
Mm.
And then you're like, wait, what? How, what? Who? And then you get like, some Caribbean kids whose parents have maybe somehow gone through some trauma themselves and kind of handed that trauma down. And they will say crazy things like, oh, but yeah, like in Africa, they don't have enough food. Everyone's hungry and blah, blah, blah. It's like, stuff like, and you're like, yeah, but that was never my reality growing up as a child. So at that age, it was, and then having to make the transition to the point where, because as a kid, the last thing you want to do is stick out. You don't want to, for the wrong reasons, let's say. You don't want to stand out for reasons that, didn't bring you like any joy or, but it felt like that was what was happening. And I think that early experience, which I would go as far as to say, I know that for a fact that for a lot of other African kids, it made them feel like they needed to hide.
Mm.
And, I remember like kids who changed their names or would say their name was something else
Yeah.
and say, oh, no, my family's Jamaican. We're not Ghanaian, we're not Nigerian or whatever, just to be able to kind of not have to deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I was always like, I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, this is my name and this is who I am. And if you believe I have a tail, then sure, yeah, go ahead. Why not? And I think also being quite a kind of stubborn-minded individual anyway, even as a young person, I was always just like, yeah, but I am who I am. And I think when I got into music, that fed into that, and I was always very proud to to showcase, maybe not as proud as I am today, but there was always a small part of that there to showcase who I am and who, what my history is, what my ancestry is in the music that I made and still make. And I think as a black man growing up now in the music industry, it's so, and as a black Nigerian growing up in the music industry, it's wild to see. Like yesterday, I'll give you an example. I was in the car yesterday,
Yes.
driving to a gig, and I'm listening to like national radio, and Burna Boy is on national radio,
Yeah.
and he's singing in Yoruba on national radio. Like young me would have never thought that would be a possibility. Like
Yeah.
I would have never thought that would be a thing. It's so wild to me, but also makes me so proud, like,
Yeah.
yeah, and why not? Why can't we hear the songs of all people on national radio? Why does it, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Different languages and, because it just makes us so much less prone to this divisive way of thinking about culture and art. Yes, we can have different cultures, but we don't need to then put those differences in a hierarchy. Oh, this one is greater than this one, and this one is more interesting than this one. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
think, it's better to celebrate those differences, because then through the celebration of those differences, we start to see the similarities,
Yeah.
and I think for me, my experience has been one of trying to find myself again, so that I no longer appear as just a black man in this world, like I'm just a man, right?
Mhm.
That's trying to get back to that place I was as a child,
Yeah.
Exactly.
before it was like, oh, you're different. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Yeah.
I really,
Yeah, that's
yeah, I really do.
yeah, go ahead.
I really do agree with you about like the celebration of different cultures. And then also just like how you were saying, like I love me some Burna Boy, I love me some Kid. Like that is something that I am very down with that.
Yes.
So it's really wonderful to actually just like hear you like express like how your oh my goodness, how your experience
Mm,
with that, but also just like that like whole example of like now I get to hear, a language that I grew up around hearing, on national radio. Like this is something
yeah,
that's
it's
beautiful. So,
crazy.
yeah.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say it's really interesting to hear your experience too, because I know I can speak for a lot of Black Americans of knowing that it's really we grew up with that easily categorized type of system of
Mm,
look like because we don't have an origin that we know.
Yeah.
And so it's just really
right.
interesting to hear somebody who moved from their homeland country to a predominantly white space and just
Hmm.
kind of what that does to also in the mind of a kid's brain, just kind of what that
Hmm.
does. It's just really interesting to
Yes.
hear you speak on that. If you
Mm,
could, I know you spoke on it a little bit more, but if you could kind of dive into what it was like to um, kind of start being a musician in a space where you had those sorts of not reservations, but those sorts of interactions and like man. Sorry, because I had a question
no,
and you
no, no,
kind
it's
of answered
okay.
it, but I'm just trying to ask, like, what was it like for you to start doing jazz and to really get into the genre as a Black man, but
Hmm.
also as an African man in a predominantly white
Mm,
place like the UK?
mm. That is a great question, because lucky for me, a lot of my mentors when I first started playing jazz were black men. There were other black men who were playing that music. There
Yeah.
was a generation or two generations of black men ahead of me. Most of them would be in their kind of mid 50s now, going to 60, who I remember when I first met some of those guys, they would tell stories of playing jazz in London and not being able to get into any of the spaces, any of the clubs, because it was dominated. It was a white dominated space. Considering that the music is a Black American art form, it was a white dominated space here in the UK, and they wouldn't allow these people into those spaces. I was actually playing um, in the band with one of these people yesterday, and we talked about it again. And and it's interesting because for them, it was like they had to then create their own ecosystem. They had to find venues and clubs where they could create their own shows, make their own nights, which then became a huge thing.
Yeah.
Because you just can't, you can't hide, you can't stifle that energy. It's God given, whatever you want to call it. It's, you can't stifle it, and they would create that. And so a lot of the guys that I grew up initially learning from were those people. And so I felt like, I didn't know it at the time, but looking back on it, I realized that I was quite lucky in that I felt like I had a direct, authentic link to the heart of the music rather than the head of the music, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
Because jazz is as much a head music as it is a heart music.
100.
But I think the problem is that, without being too divisive about it, what I later came to see was that a lot of my white counterparts at the time, I felt like they were dealing with the head side a lot more. Because, and I wonder if it's because they didn't feel like they had permission to deal with the heart of it, because the heart of it relates to the cultural elements of the music.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And it was like, you're not invited to the cookout, as you guys would say. So how dare you? Do you know what I mean? How dare you think you can bring the potato salad? Do you know what I'm trying to say? Which is like the basic thing, but you have to get it right. You know what I mean?
100%.
So they didn't feel like they had permission to do that. So they would be like, okay, let's get to the head of the music.
Yeah.
And they did that a lot. And then I found that it became a gate kept kind of premises, where it's like, well, we can do this and you can't do this. It's like, no, you're talking nonsense. Of course we can. We just don't place as much value on it because to us, it's not the entire picture. But you've taken the little that you think you're allowed to have, you've blown it up and tried to make it into the whole thing, which is actually, when you zoom out, it's kind of, at the risk of getting overly political, it's what colonialism is all about, But let's put that one to the side.
Put a pin in it.
So I was, yeah. Do you know what I mean? Because it's a whole thing. But I was lucky enough to be studying with some of these black men who they themselves had a connection directly to their American counterparts, and they could see the relationship between the cultures. And so there was more of a permission to be like, yeah, your culture is our culture because your forefathers are our forefathers,
Exactly.
And so that helped me very early on to take ownership of it and go, yeah, I'm as much a part of this. Obviously, I'm not gonna like change my name and put on an American accent because I don't need to, in order to appear like, I don't have to do that. I just accept that, who knows? Maybe Charlie Parker's great grandfather was descended from the same, do you know what I mean? Who knows?
Yeah.
But that's that. That's what that is. So anyway, I think fast forwarding, like by the time I got to university, I mean, I only went to study music because I come from a Nigerian family, and the thought of not doing a degree in something is like, no, we don't do that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which is crazy, but that's where we were at. So I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to go do that law degree that you all thought I was going to go and do. I'm going to go study music. And when I arrived at university, or what you guys call college, I realized most of the people I met there were white because they could afford to be there.
Yeah.
And a lot of the black musicians couldn't afford to go study in these places, or and a lot didn't even know it was possible. They didn't even know that there was something you could do. Whereas a lot of the white kids, their parents had paid for their music lessons since they were like 5, 6, 7 years old. So there was always this trajectory that was open to them, So I remember getting there and feeling like, wow, yeah, you were all like, you have the head part of it down, and but there was just a thing here that I felt I couldn't find with them. A lot of them, not all, but a lot. And the ones who I felt had it, they had discovered it because they had somehow found themselves in good company, in the right company.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was the major difference since for me growing up as a black man playing jazz in the UK was realizing, and it's changed a lot now because I think um, the times have changed and people have realized, oh, we had it wrong, we were trying to colonize this music, you know what I'm saying? Like, and that's not what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be like trying to assimilate and respect, where it comes from and not try to like take over and be like, well, look what we did with it. It's like, no, it's like respect the people you met there, respect their traditions, respect their culture, respect their language, and, you know, borrow rather than steal. And do you know what I mean? And, but
Yes.
always, and you know what I mean? And always point back to be like, well, look, I learned it from this guy. So
Exactly.
if you want to learn it, go to that guy too. Don't be like, yeah, come to me, bypass that guy, pay me.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
yeah. So
definitely.
all of that. But yeah, it was those revelations and seeing that play out not just in the music, but also in the kind of the politics of the world. And it's quite mind blowing.
Yeah, no, it
Truly.
definitely is. And like you said, give credit where credit is due, 100%. That's something that I will
Exactly.
always say. So
Exactly.
this kind of actually led me perfectly into this next question that we have for you. I'll give a little bit of context before I give the question. We have
Hmm.
this place here in Lansing where actually I just kind of stumbled upon it one day, and apparently all of the jazz musicians who study here in at MSU go to this pub called Moriarty's Pub.
Wait, where are you guys? Whereabouts are you guys? I don't actually even know where in America you are.
We are in Michigan. We Impact is in at MSU, Michigan State University. So
Right.
you're in the Lansing area in Michigan.
Right. Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Cool. Cool.
Sorry, forgot to, sometimes
Michigan.
there's some
Okay, so that's
varying.
the
Yeah.
same state. That's the same state that Detroit is in.
Yes.
Yes.
Detroit's in Michigan. All right. Cool.
100%. Yes.
Hmm.
Um,
Cool. Great.
in this Lansing, the Detroit area does 100% have like these different jazz bars and things like that that people go to. But specifically here in Lansing, the students from MSU and then also other people will come to this pub too who aren't student or who aren't MSU affiliated. They come there to kind of, come together and jam out. It's a great place that's open and welcoming to new
Mm,
incoming artists, but also people who are very much established in their artistry. So
mm,
really I'm wondering how you feel, like what is the importance of having a place for up and coming artists, jazz artists, or any type of musician to come
mm,
in without having an expectation to be the best of the best and come in to
mm,
have this level because improvisation is like somewhat of a core of a jazz jam sesh, right? So having that
mm,
kind of place to work out their muscle as like a jazz artist, what do you think is the
mm.
importance of having a place like that for developing artists?
I think it is the heart of any scene, music scene,
Yeah,
whether it's jazz or blues or rock and roll or whatever. Do you know what I mean? It's
yeah,
the lifeblood. I think without places like that, it's harder to kind of to keep the fire burning. That's the meeting place, isn't it?
yeah,
It's the point of exchange. Um, like everyone who like a lot of people you talk to about, say for instance, the great American trumpet player Roy Hargrove.
mm, yeah,
He would spend hours into the early morning playing at jam sessions in New York. And famously, you hear a lot of young musicians talk about how I went to a jam session. Roy Hargrove was there, and he was so kind, and he was so welcoming, and he was very he was very endearing, but also um, willing to spend time to speak and educate younger musicians. This is like there's like one of the baddest trumpet players.
Yeah.
we've ever had. Do you know what I mean? And he's famous for that. And I think that is the right attitude. That is the right spirit. I remember growing up as a child in Nigeria, like some evenings in the week, that there would be this moment in the evening, not every evening, but from time to time, maybe a couple of times a week, where one of the kind of older kids would gather the younger kids and tell them stories.
Oh, yeah.
I remember as a child listening to those stories. And then as you got older, you then had a responsibility to tell kids stories to the younger kids. And oftentimes they would just make up these stories. It was just invented. There was some like standard kind of stories, and they were always kind of what are they called, fables, like where human animals were substituting humans in the stories. The tortoise was very famous in a lot of these stories, for being the kind of, sly, canny,
Hmm.
creature. And I remember those, and to me, there's a kind of a parity between that and the way jazz works as a language, and I think having a central hub where young and old can meet, or if you want to see it as new and old, if you like, because you don't have to be old, you don't have to be young to start jazz. You can start jazz if you're 60, you know what I mean? So where new and established can meet and um, exchange ideas, and you can learn about the culture and learn about the language, not just the musical language, but also the, I guess if you like, emotional language of the music. Which is, I think, it's important to play in the music. I think it's vital actually. It's like it's the heart, and I think that word for me is the best way to describe it. And if that stops moving or being, then the body dies. And I think without that, it's very difficult to have a thriving scene anywhere.
Very true, for
Mm.
sure. Um, Kind of moving into the last couple of questions for you.
Sure.
It's been super hard for me to not sit here and kick my feet and scream up and down and do a backflip if I could, because I've actually watched you on YouTube and listened to your music, specifically a lot of your earlier stuff with Amy Winehouse since I was like 13,
Mm.
14 years old.
Oh
Um,
wow.
that's kind of like that was my first introduction to jazz, and she is who made me fall in love with jazz. So this is like really cyclical
Mm.
circle for me. But I'd love to hear you talk about that is like kind of some of the youngest work that I can find of you on the internet. I'd love to hear you talk about
Yeah.
how that time working with her shaped your musicianship, but also being a producer and a composer, and kind of how that
Mm.
launched you into your career that it is today.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, it was definitely a pivotal time for me. Um, if not necessarily as an artist, but definitely as an artist, and I'll touch on in what aspects a bit later. But I think so much more I guess just as a music mind, because I think the mind of the artist can be different to the mind of the producer, which can be different to the mind of a composer, which can be different to the mind of a session musician, or do you know what I mean? But when you have what I like to call the music mind, it's more of like a bird's eye view of the whole thing, of what the whole thing can be. And my time with Amy was really important in helping me to shape and develop that side or that mind for me, because when I met her, she was 19 years old, and she was writing these songs. And there are some artists who I think I tend to refer to them as a voice for their generation. They write in a way that the people of their generation understand, mostly. Others can too, but it's for the people of their generation. It's a direct translation, and she definitely was one of those. Um, and I think watching her and the way she interacted with her music, but in relation to the music that influenced her, which a lot of which was jazz and hip hop actually, funny enough. Because it's funny because she was one of the first artists that I worked with who was influenced by a style of music that she wasn't actually presenting, like in an obvious way. So she was heavily influenced by hip hop, but she wasn't on stage like rapping, or
Yeah.
making, out and out hip hop music.
Yeah.
But she was heavily influenced by the energy and the spirit of hip hop.
Mhm.
And it was funny because when we first kind of started working together, I was trying to understand how that manifested in her artistry. And I realized later on, I mean, we didn't spend that. We probably spent a year and a half, maybe if that, working together. Um, and in that time, I realized that it was kind of because before I started playing guitar, I kind of had a few years, like way before I discovered guitar, where I was really into hip hop. In like around 2000, 2001, I was like really heavily into
Good time.
hip
Gold.
hop.
Good
Is
time.
that right? Yeah, right. Golden age, like
Yeah.
it was like just before the Chronic came out, because I feel like when the Chronic came out, hip hop changed like
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
lot. So before that, when like the kind of the golden age of NWA, ultramagnetic MCs, that kind of time, and I remember being into it, but I was into it was kind of like the rock and roll of its time, like it was, yes, it was the music that a lot of young people listened to, but there was a certain kind of empowerment that I think you got from hip hop, and you didn't have to be of hip hop to feel the empowerment of it.
Yeah.
And you could be anyone. That's the crazy thing. And it was that, I think, that Amy was referring to in how it influenced her. I think she felt empowered by the fact that you could be whoever, and you could see yourself in this music, you know.
Yes.
And I understood that later. But so being influenced by a style of music, but not necessarily presenting that music in your artistry, was interesting, because it was like, oh, you can take influences from things, from the different elements of what a thing was. It doesn't have to be the obvious element, So anyway, that influenced then my thinking of, oh, so I can allow my hip hop influence to come through in my music without being a rapper or making beats per se in that way. And I got that from talking with her a lot about that, Although she was influenced by, a lot of jazz vocalists. I think Dinah Washington was like one of her big favorites. I remember one time we were talking and she was like a huge fan of Kim Burrell, the gospel singer. But I was like, oh, but everyone else that I know who's a huge fan of Kim Burrell is trying to sing like Kim Burrell, And it was funny because she would like sometimes shyly and sheepishly try to do some of those things, but knowing that she wasn't gonna be that kind of singer, she would basically just, a lot of the things that people adopted, like people who were then trying to sound like Amy, a lot of the stuff that they then adopted as like Amyisms were actually the things that Amy was trying to do from some of her influences that she didn't quite get right, but stumbled on something else in the process, which I found hilarious when later on I would, even when I taught and there were all these like young singers who were trying to sound like Amy, I was like, you realize that the things that you're trying to do was the result of, in quote unquote, her kind of happy accidents,
Yeah.
and you kind of have to find your own happy accidents, to develop your own unique style, So yeah, so again, watching her grow as a musician and going, oh yeah, you can take pride in your mistakes, because eventually those are the things that become your voice, as it were. So yeah, that did shape my kind of trajectory of not allowing people to tell you who you were, and just being like, no, I like this, and this, and those ingredients create this in me.
Yeah.
and that's all there needs to be. And we can all have the same ingredients, but be shaped differently by those things. Have a different flavor, which is completely welcome. But also, I think being her musical director and having to interpret the album that we were touring, her first album mostly, Frank, having to tour that record with the personnel that I had to work with on stage, which was quite different. It was like, I mean, I say quite different. I didn't have a keyboard player. I didn't have backing vocalists. I had a 3-part horn section,
Yeah.
which hardly existed on the album. And I was like, but it taught me to be creative and imaginative as an arranger. And actually, those were the building blocks of, it doesn't matter what the instruments are, let's make something out of it. That I learned that from that experience. Yeah, it was a great time, and it really helped me to build my confidence. Because she would just be like, "Yeah, Fem, just do the arrangements, let me know, and then I'll just sing over the top." And I would arrange in the rehearsal room. Like, I didn't write the arrangements at home. I would come in and I'll be like, right, you play this, you play this, you play this, I'll play this. And then we all did it together. And then I'll turn to Amy and be like, what do you think? She'll either be like, I love it, or I don't like it. I'm not into it. There was never any like, yeah. It's like, I love it, Fem, let's go. And she'll sing over the top. Or, I don't like what you did there. Can we change that? I'll be like, cool. All right, let's try this. Do you know what I mean? And that's how we worked. And it really, it helps me develop my confidence as a musical voice of my own, because I was allowed to put some of myself. This is what I meant earlier when I was like, any opportunity that affords me the opportunity to put a bit of my own self in, let's go,
Yeah, that's
And
beautiful.
I had that from then, so that was great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Wow. No, I love what you were saying about how you were talking about hip hop, and because we have actually been like talking extensively, honestly, about the relationship between hip hop and jazz. Like, it feels
Hmm.
like because you compared hip hop to being rock and roll, and we literally just came from a jazz performance, and I was like, and why can't jazz be the new party music? Like, I would
Well,
love
exactly.
I would love to just dance around and like,
It's
have this like,
coming. It's
it gets a
coming
little
back. It's
jumping
coming back.
sometimes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Needs to.
It needs to. And it's amazing how there's so many samples out there also in different hip hop like songs or just like music and stuff like that where they sample jazz music. And I think it's
Hmm.
because like how you were talking about hip hop music, like it's not only up here, it's also in here. And I think it has
That's right.
the same like jazz and hip hop where like they're not twins,
They're
and
siblings.
they're definitely siblings though. Maybe
Yeah,
different
yeah, yeah.
mama,
No
but
doubt.
like,
Same
same
daddy.
daddy.
Exactly.
Yes, and I
Exactly.
just it's definitely something that we're gonna keep talking about, but that we have talked about extensively.
Yeah.
So I'm really glad that you brought that up, honestly.
No, absolutely. I think if you listen to anyone from either world talk who really knows their shit,
Yeah.
no one would ever dispute the fact that they're siblings,
Yeah.
brothers from other mothers, kind of
Yes.
situation. Yeah, do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely, no
Exactly.
doubt.
Cool. Well,
Yeah.
I do have another question, kind of
Hmm.
about the music and developing music, specifically in a collaborative environment. I know you just came from a rehearsal, so you already you're
Yes.
fresh out of that right
Yeah.
now. But I want to know what are some of the challenges, kind of misinterpretation, I guess, within a team of musicians and creatives trying to
Mm,
collaborate on something together. I know that sometimes it can be a little
mm,
bit hard to work on things with other creatives and being like, well, my way's the best, or your way's the best, or stuff like that. So I wonder, because also you talked about how music is language, and so there is room obviously for misinterpretation when it comes to any language. So
hmm.
yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Actually a really, really cool question, because it's something that I know that there was a long time in my musical journey where I struggled with that. You
Yeah.
know, I struggled with um, either I would be in a room in a collaborative space, and I would either struggle with um, being willing to offer up ideas because of the fear of rejection,
Mm.
Mm.
Yeah.
or wanting to voice my idea and have it accepted because I was afraid that what someone else might offer up might not like how do I express that I wasn't into something that someone else was suggesting
Yeah.
without upsetting, or do you know what I mean,
Hmm.
or disrespecting that person. And it's interesting because some years ago I met there's an amazing jazz guitar player originally from Republic of Benin, lived in America for a while but now lives in Europe, by the name of Lionel Lueke, who I don't know if you've heard of him. He's he's a phenomenal artist,
Yeah.
plays, has his own music out and everything, but currently tours with Herbie Hancock. And I remember when we first met and was kind of developing a friendship, around the second or third time we hung out at a festival somewhere, we were talking about something like this.
Yeah.
And he said, when he started his trio, he had a trio that he played he played with for years. They met while they were all studying music together at college, and they were playing a lot of his own music, and a lot of his music is rooted in African rhythmic language.
Yeah.
And he was like, he would come in with these compositions and teach it to them, and they would hear it in a different place than where it was written. And at first, in the early days, it would frustrate him a little bit, but then he realized, hold on a minute, I'm gonna learn to hear it where you hear it,
Oh.
so I can understand your perspective, because it might make it easier for me to show you my perspective when I understand your perspective.
Mhm.
And it was that conversation that completely switched my mindset about, because I also would write music and bring it to my band, and it'd be like, Femi, where's the one? I'd be like, it's here, can't you hear it? It's here. It's like, no. And then I learned from having that conversation, be like, okay, good question, but where do you hear the one?
Mm.
And then they will play it, and I'll be like, oh, okay. And it was a lesson for me, because sometimes when they would play it the way they heard the one, I couldn't hear it that way. So I was like, I need to be able to hear it in all the ways,
Yeah.
because then it what it does is it serves up a certain type of humility that wasn't about being humble for humble's sake, but it allowed you to understand that actually we're not here to serve ourselves, we're here to serve the music. And
Mm.
so whatever made the music most potent, that's what wins out.
Yeah.
So in a collaborative space, for me it's like, let's serve the song, let's serve the music, which lyric best tells the story, which chord best evokes the emotion.
Mm.
That's the thing that we want to get. And I think if when everyone is thinking on that wavelength, it's the most beautiful space. But when we're not, when people are operating from a place of usually fear,
Yeah.
either the fear of being rejected or having your idea rejected, or the fear of not understanding the other person's idea, or and not knowing how to voice that, that's when we can't make the space work. So if you can just like put that fear to one side and know that we're here to serve the song or serve the composition, a collaborative space can be the most rewarding space. And it's one of the things I love the most about working in theatre, because it requires collaboration almost exclusively in
Mm.
order for it to work.
Yeah.
And when it works, it's one of the most powerful art forms out there, for sure. You know,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's for me. That's yeah, makes it beautiful.
Thank you.
That's awesome to hear you talk about that collaboration, because we both were graduating soon, but we both work in advertising, but the creative side. So it's really interesting to hear you
Right.
talk about the musical side, because we know what it's like when everybody has an idea and then I was like, no, well, my idea is really good. And it's like, well, my ego is telling me that my idea is better than that. So it's just
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah, yeah. Right.
It's interesting to
Yeah,
hear
yeah.
how you
Totally.
navigate that differently within music. Kind of
Right.
talking around the same sphere of creativity and kind of staying fluid with the creation of music. On your newest record, Music is Feeling, you mentioned how you originally didn't, you originally wrote the album with just a trio, and then that you later came
Mm,
to reimagine it with a full orchestra. I'm just interested in knowing
mm.
what kind of ignited that switch and made you start to see it that way.
Yeah, again, yeah, it was, I think it was the fact that I wanted to, I was curious, I personally, as a person and as a musician, was curious to hear what African music or African influenced music sounds like when performed on these kind of traditionally Western orchestral instruments, as it were. Because I know what it sounds like on traditional African instruments, you know. And it was like, and that was, and I was like, well, I've already written all this music, which is not, it's not exclusively African in its nature, but a lot of the kind of the rhythmic sub elements of it were. And I was like, what would happen if I introduced those, as much of those elements as I can to, you know, like trying to traditional European orchestral instruments. And that's kind of where it started for me. But also I have a fascination with the orchestra, especially with the string section in an orchestra. I feel like it can be one of the most powerful sounds, you know, because it has such a huge range and it can do so many different things. And actually part of that idea was, what does it sound like if I bring, you know, that element and just place it on top of a bunch of guys just playing like African drums, you know? That was the original thing. But then I was like, that would require a whole nother project, and I already had this project, you know, kind of on the table. So I was like, I'm just gonna like combine the elements as much as possible, and that's kind of how I ended up there. It was trying to, I guess, bring together, you know, my roots as a musician, but also stuff that I was learning about orchestration and all that kind of stuff, and trying to kind of bring that together for myself, really. But also to showcase, you know, the fact that I was into that. I was into orchestrating for and writing for orchestra and trying to grow and trying to kind of signpost that, oh, hey guys, look, I can do this too. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's a learning curve, you know, and you grow, and it's funny because sometimes I listen back to that record because that was from back in 2016.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote a lot of that stuff in 2014, 2015. It's 10 years now, and listen back to it and thinking, wow, I've come such a long way from that, which, you know, I guess everyone wants to be able to say, but yeah, it's fascinating. But I still enjoy even listening to it and going and trying to trace some of my thought processes whilst doing it and thinking, what was I thinking again when I did that? And cringing at some of it also, like, oh, I don't know how good that sounds now, but you know, that's life, you know.
It's really cool to hear you speak about this, because we both have gone through your discography quite extensively. We've had the time to, so
That's amazing.
it's
Wow.
really feeling
So cool.
like you're just peeking behind a curtain before a play to get to know what you because I remember
Right,
listening to that
right.
album, like I remember thinking I've never heard anything like this because you could hear the African influences,
Interesting.
but I couldn't pinpoint what it was. It was so cohesive,
Right.
but I knew that it was something
Interesting.
different than the traditional. It's just really cool to hear you talk about that.
Yeah. Oh,
Kind of
amazing.
talking on that more, you a lot of majority of your album, well, all of your albums actually are all instrumental, or and if they're not instrumental, you are not the one that sings on them. But you have an EP of those PNG sessions where you sing, and I'm really
Hmm.
interested to know why that was the first time that you were recorded singing and what significance that
No,
had.
I actually sing on Music is the Feeling.
Music is the Feeling off Ori and Meta.
No, no, no. Yeah. So on Orimeta, I did sing a bit on Orimeta, a little bit. On the first album, I didn't sing at all.
Uh,
except for a couple of little things. Because the truth is, I feel more comfortable singing in Yoruba than I do singing in English,
Okay.
mhm.
which is kind of a weird mind thing, but
It's not weird. It was
that's
my
what that
hunch.
is.
It's not weird. That was my
Right. Well,
hunch.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. I feel much more comfortable singing in Yoruba than singing in English because I feel like there's such a long history in out there of people singing phenomenally in English.
Mhm.
I feel like there's nothing I can add to that. Whereas in Yoruba, especially given that I'm trying to write lyrics that aren't kind of what you would hear day to day in Yoruba music, lyrically speaking, anyway. So I felt much more comfortable trying to add something there than in English, which is maybe a short answer to your question. But on Orimeta, no, so on Orimeta, I didn't sing. I sang little bits here and there, but the actual title track Orimeta is sung by a friend of mine, an amazing singer called Zantane Black, who is also Nigerian origin himself, but um, he's a piano player slash singer, amazing artist. And then on by the time I arrived at the music is the feeling, I was way more confident
Mhm.
in my singing. So I think on that one, I'm singing all the songs on the music is the feeling.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
yeah. So yeah, it's a bit of a journey.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, definitely. Well, we only have one more question for you tonight. Well, I don't
sure.
know. Is it nighttime for you?
What time is it? We're
It's yeah, it's pretty. It was getting there. It's like 20 past 7 in the
7.
evening.
Oh, okay. Because
Seven
I
twenty.
was like,
Yeah,
it's around 2 p.m. for us here, so I was like, night, day.
cool. Yeah, it's not dark yet though. We're in summertime now, so
Oh
it's
Oh,
cool.
yes,
that's nice.
wonderful. Well, and we just have it's a really it's not a crazy serious question like how our other ones may have
Sure.
been tonight. Um, but I really just wanted to know. So you have traveled to a bunch of different places, right? Your music has taken you to a bunch of different places all across the world. Am I
Mm,
correct on that?
mm.
Yeah. So,
Yes.
what would you say has been like the best meal? Because I know, okay, you have okay, Nigerian food is amazing, right? And then,
Wait, what Nigerian food do you guys know though?
like, fufu and igusi, right? Is that Nigerian?
Woo! Come on. All right. Okay, cool. Continue with the question. That's good. You passed the test. You passed. So you have places where you are to eat that stuff, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah, there's even like
I
a
mean, yeah,
place.
because Nigerians are everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I was
They're
just
everywhere.
wondering
So,
what has kind of been your favorite meal to have where your favorite place to travel has been and for food. There we go. That's the question.
wow, for food.
Yes.
That's a tough question because the thing is, I'm a foodie.
Me too.
Like, like out and out food. I love food. Like, food is it's the soul. Um, so I think the thing is, there's nothing more comforting for me than eating Nigerian food. Like good, like pounded yam with egusi. There's nothing more comforting than that. And I would always put it number one, especially when I've been in Nigeria and I've eaten it in Nigeria.
Yeah.
But let's just pretend that doesn't count, right? I would say potentially that's such a hard question because I feel like food falls into categories,
It
you
does. It
know?
definitely does. Yeah.
Because I was in Japan last year and
Ooh.
I had some incredible food, right? But then I've had some like really like spiritual moments eating in Italy also, you know,
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
certain places. So, but I wouldn't put them in the same category. This is the problem.
Hmm.
So it's a really tough question. What I'm trying to say is it's a really tough question to answer.
Yeah.
But if I had to really say one place, hmm, oh my gosh,
It's a hard one.
maybe, yeah, it's really, really tough because like having any food that is like that comes from a place, having that food in that place. Because when you live in a big city like London, you
Yeah.
can get food from all over the world. But
Yeah.
having that same food from that place, that's my jam. You
Okay.
know.
That's a
So
good.
when I've had Japanese food in Japan,
Yeah.
Italian food in Italy, I remember having a kebab in in Turkey in Istanbul. That was just like, wait, what did you say? You know. Um,
Yeah.
or when I've had like I mean, okay, I've not had Mexican food in Mexico, but I thought Mexican food in London was okay until I went to a Mexican restaurant in New York, and
Oh,
I was like,
Yeah.
wait, what is this?
This is
You
not what I
know,
was
so
having
it's
back home.
yeah.
right, and I know that that's not even yet in Mexico, so I'm like, come on, someone asked me for a gig in Mexico, please, so I can go eat there. But yeah, like the food in the place. That's my answer.
Okay.
It's a good one.
Do you know what I mean? That's all I can do.
That's a good one.
Yeah,
Oh,
good question.
thank you. Well, that's all we have for you today. I want to thank you so
Yeah.
much for,
No,
joining us
thank you
here
guys. It's been
today
fun.
and sharing your time with you and sharing your just like words because with us because honestly this feels like it's been such an inspirational just like
Oh,
interview with just
amazing.
like some of
Yeah.
the things that you've said. Like I will definitely take those away with me.
I just want to
Thank
express
you.
sincere gratitude for your time as well. You'll just never know how much this means to me, how much this
Oh,
conversation meant, just being
thank
able
you
to
so
talk with
much.
you and just get to know you as a person is truly a blessing. And I'm just really I just much gratitude for your time. Thank you so much.
Yes,
Thank
and
you.
you
Thank you guys. It's really a pleasure.